All right, welcome to the September 14th meeting of the Issaquah Environmental Board. I'm Jamie Finch and I'll be your chair tonight. Due to the hybrid nature of this meeting, we will have some members attending in person and others by computer or phone. For all meeting attendees attending remotely, please state your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. And then commissioners, if you have a desire to speak, I am now positioned at the back so I can actually see when you tip your signs. But please do that if you would like to speak. As we've been doing at the end of major sections of the agenda, we will be summarizing the discussion and asking for kind of a quick thumbs up, thumbs down, and whether board members feel that captures what the discussion was. I think from there, Stacey, we could probably jump into attendance. So if you want to run through that, it'd be great.
Great. Tom Anderson.
Here.
Nathangi Ramanathan. Nancy Davidson. Here. Jamie Finch.
Here.
Cameron Fisher has an excused absence. Rishi Hazrat.
Here.
Dan Hinz has an excused absence. Laura Levico has an excused absence. Ashwin Manoharan. Don McWilliams.
Here.
Ann Newcomb. Here. And Janet Wall has an excused absence.
Okay, thank you, Stacey. Next up, we have approval of the minutes. Does anyone have any comments on minutes from August 10th? Hearing none, those are approved by unanimous consent. And then up next, I believe we have public comment. I know we have at least one member of the public that's interested in speaking. There's a hand being raised. So I think general guidelines for public comment, looks like we have attendees coming in via web platform. So I'll skip the phone part, but please unmute your microphone, state your name, address in relation to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently. Please limit comments to 5 minutes, and then we ask that you mute your microphone when done. And then Stacey, if you want to run through if there's anyone else that beyond who we have already indicated desire to speak.
Great. And it looks like we do have one phone caller if you do want to run through those instructions.
Okay. If you're on the phone, please press *3 to indicate your desire to speak, and then I believe Stacey will be able to help you with muting and unmuting. I don't know, have we figured out who that is attending by phone? Well, maybe if you just want to run through, maybe the first person that indicated they wanted to speak, and we can see if that person is interested.
Great. So, and just wanted to acknowledge too that we did receive 2 written comments from Connie Marsh. One was project specific on the Raleigh pipeline. The other was on ICAP input on Title 18. Connie, I will go ahead and unmute you, and you should be able to turn on your video as well.
I'm assuming, Connie Marsh, yes. I'm assuming that you read the emails, so I'm moving on to something different, and I'll wind up for those at the end. So first thing is the King County, and I was reading the waste stuff, and what struck me is we're chasing a running beast. So the first thing that needs to happen is you actually have to address lifestyle changes, and don't use your old stuff more, and then if you're going to buy used, and then you can go into the whole waste stream thing. So as I was cruising through Marymore Park and thinking of my life, most of the large parks in major cities have big swap meet, antique show type things in one big park, and they invite their charities to fundraise and sell used stuff, and they help support the cost. And people come out and they sell their stuff and they buy used stuff and they have a great time. And that is one way that a person could highlight and make cool, not going to Target and buying new stuff that you then throw away. Moving on to the board checklist. Well, I'm going back to its heart. It was envisioned as a database that showed the actual impacts and then the mitigations for impacts that was supposed to be carried over time to see if we are actually meeting our goals. And so it seems to me it needs to be super short, super accurate, data driven with summary pieces on how the projects did not fit with the environmental goals per project, and then a larger summary at the end of the year as to whether the entire code as a whole is in keeping and fitting with our overall arching environmental goals. I don't think this checklist does that, but I think that's what it should do. So onto the PPC information that I sent out. I tried to show you how PPC was focused in this conversation that was presented. And so hopefully you read it and understand that focus. And one note is that the staff keeps raising the SEPA limits to 20 and 30,000. This time it's 20,000, no matter how many times PPC says they want it lower than that. And I'm not sure why there is this push, but I thought you should be aware that this push kept happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. I do not see anyone else indicating they'd like to speak.
All right. Well, with that, then we'll move into the core of our agenda. The first item is the King County Read Plus program. So I don't know if Stacy, if you want to introduce the members joining, or if they just want to introduce themselves, they can take it away.
Sure, yeah, I think just a note for the board, the request came in to the mayor for a presentation. She asked that this come to the environmental board first, so I think tonight is mostly informational, and we'll see where we go from there. John, anyone else from your team that I should make sure is unmuted, or you the primary presenter?
I see Amy Ockerlander, she's our government relations person, and then Pat McLaughlin is actually here, he's the division director.
Great. One moment.
Should I just start?
Sorry, I'm reorganizing my screen so I can see everything. All right, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm John Walsh. I'm the Strategy and Performance Section Manager for King County Solid Waste Division. So my team works on things like REAP Plus or rates or long-term planning, things like that. But yeah, I'm here to talk about this new county program that we're calling REAP Plus. Hopefully you're able to see that GIF. So if you saw it, there was kind of like a Rolodex and you saw all this kind of rewords spinning around. That's to just kind of help us explain. Oh, sorry, can you go back one? That's to help us explain sort of what the program is, right? Because when you think about anything that has to do with reducing waste or waste prevention, all those words start with re, right? You could recycle that piece of paper or reuse that water bottle, repair that bike, restore that piece of furniture, et cetera, right? All those rewords. So RE Plus is a way for us to capture all those words. And really what we want people to think about is before you throw that thing away, see if you can replus it instead, right? Kind of to what that person in the public was saying earlier, right? It's all about reuse and prevention and things upstream before people even buy something and then throw it away. So next slide, please. So this is just a quick look at our mission and our vision statement. Really, RE Plus is our program to reach the county's zero waste of resources goal. So about 70% of what currently gets thrown away every year is useful, right? It's things like cardboard, metal, food, all that stuff. That could all be put to better and more useful purposes than just ending up in our landfill, right? So the RE Plus mission is really about trying to find ways to prevent that from even coming into our system or finding a better place for it through recycling and things like that. So next slide, please. And RE Plus is a call to action. There's a lot of text on here. I'm not going to read it all. But this is really highlighted in several county and city documents, right? One is the Strategic Climate Action Plan. You can see there it says zero food waste in the landfill by 2030. It's been in King County code since the early 2000s. So you can see another reference to zero waste of resources by 2030 there. We have our King County Equity and Social Justice Strategic Plan here because we want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that, you know, includes the community, that doesn't further any, you know, burdens or anything like that. So we want to, you know, how we do it is important too. So we're using our ESJ strategic plan to help us guide us there. It's also in the K4C, that's the King County Cities for Climate Change commitment. So you can see also in there, there's zero waste resources by 2030. And then the Comprehensive Solid Waste Management Plan that was adopted in 2019 also has the references. So really, you know, just kind of wanted to show that this has been something we've been talking about for quite a long time now, and it's in a lot of our kind of regional commitment documents. And so we're really trying to just deliver on this very important goal that we have as a region. So next slide, please. So the next few slides get into some survey research we did. We just completed a public survey last month. We enlisted EMC Research to do this, and they asked several questions, but I just pulled up a couple of them. So what this slide shows is that just hearing a brief introductory statement about REAP+, there's already strong support. You can see about 63% supported it, 8% opposed it, and then 29% had never really heard of it before. Next slide, please.
John, quick question for you.
Sure.
Would you prefer to take questions as we go or at the end?
As we go is fine. Yeah, it's okay to interrupt. Are there any questions? I guess maybe just stop there.
Clear on how we should engage. So,
Okay.
not seeing.
Cool. Gotcha. Okay. So this is just another slide that shows like some more general questions around waste prevention and recycling and reduction. And this is also really good results. So you can see the top two, right? The first one says that 91% of people want to have harmonized recycling across our service area, right? So we have a situation where what you can recycle differs, you know, depending on where you live, work, and play. The second question also shows really strong support, 91% for enacting legislation and technologies to recycle more and reduce waste. So there's 8 questions here, and, you know, the lowest one had 67% approval. So again, most folks that took the survey just seem to be really supportive of just these concepts in general around waste prevention and reduction. Next slide, please. And this is kind of the payoff slide. So, you know, 2 slides ago, I showed that's what was on the left, right? Just hearing a brief statement, that was kind of the initial gut reaction of folks. And then on the right, that's what happened after we just said a couple of statements around REAP+, basically. And you can see the support went up 26%, right, up to 88%. Opposition only went up 2, so it went from 8 to 10%. And then that 29% that had never heard of it or didn't have any idea about it went down to 0, right? So, you know, the big takeaway here is just, you know, it didn't take a lot of effort to sort of explain the program, and people just kind of further bought into it once they heard about it. So we feel like that's just really encouraging news as we try to roll out this new program. So,
John, we do have a question from Nancy.
Sure.
Hi, John.
Hello.
I'm curious, you're talking about the support that you've received. Is this from residents in the community? Is it from businesses? Is it, who did you survey as part of this?
Yeah, this was all residences. So I forget the number. I think there was over 1,000 you know, people in the number on the survey. And then we've been doing some focus groups and a couple of just kind of more individual discussions with certain stakeholders too around this. So
Did you look across the various social structures of the county? Or was
we tried to, it was broken out by, you know, gender and racial demographics. It's also broken out, I think, by unincorporated versus incorporated, things like that. So, and yeah, we have other slides that show some more, like, I guess they're called crosstabs on it, and like really kind of across all of those, however you sort of sliced it and diced it, it was just very positive across all of those different demographic categories. So.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So here's just some context before we jump into, you know, more specifically what is REAP+ about. In King County's 50-year history of waste management, you know, this includes a lot of innovation, such as establishing one of the nation's first curbside recycling programs, also increasing diversion of our construction and demolition recycling, and then, you know, implementing collection of yard waste. So in 2018, we recycled 1 million tons versus throwing away 800,000 tons. So that, you know, led to one of the highest recycling rates at about 54%, as you can see on the green table there. However, we're also lagging in a few areas, right? Like many cities collect garbage every week, but collect organics and recycling every other week. So that's an opportunity where we can maybe flip those two around. Extended producer responsibility has been implemented in many European countries, and I found out we're actually the last state on the West Coast that does not have an EPR program. An EPR is all about making or having producers, Coca-Cola, Amazon, et cetera, take more responsibility for their products, how they're made, and helping them get recycled more. And then around 15% of what gets thrown away is food. This is about 100,000 tons of food. So that's a lot of food going to waste, and that all just ends up in the landfill. So, and then the green visual, even though I just mentioned 54% is great, right, for a recycling rate, the U.S. average is around 32% or so. You can see we basically kind of plateaued, right? I mean, we've been stuck between 50 and 54% for the last 7 years. But even if we went back even further, you would see it's just been kind of flattened out. So really, the RePlus program is a way to try to get us to the next level, right? Kind of break through this plateau and increase recycling and diversion as much as we can. So next slide, please. Yeah.
I was curious, do you have this will probably be hard because I'm not sure how you would get this data, but of the 46% that's not like currently captured, do we know what that is? Like, how does that break down?
Yeah, so let's see. So these are two different things. Well, so what we do is we have a waste characterization study that we do every 3 to 4 years. We're going through one right now, and that tells us what's in the waste stream. And so when I referenced earlier that 70% of what gets thrown away currently has value, that was based on that waste characterization study. We have folks that go into our transfer stations. They pull out the waste. They have a bunch of like different buckets basically, and so they throw the metal in that bucket, the diapers, which is actually trash, in a different bucket, and the paper, plastic, etc. So they do what's called a waste sort. And so based on I think it's the 2019 waste characterization study, that's where we found that about 70% could have been recycled instead.
So I think my question is on the specific chart that's shown here. Like this implies that 46%, the other side of the 54, is not recycled. I was curious if we know what types of materials make up the bulk of that, or how that breaks down below just kind of a overall number.
Yeah, so the 46% is about 800,000 tons of garbage. I don't have it in front of me. I think food makes up about a third of that 800,000. I think plastic, actually, it's it's on the next couple slides, actually. Yeah, sorry. The next couple slides actually have a parentheses that says how much of the waste stream plastic and paper and all that stuff makes up. So
the 54% is the total of the entire waste stream that is recycled by tonnage, presumably. That's how that number is calculated?
No, so this takes the total tons of materials recycled, right? So that goes through what's called a material recovery facility in our area. So that's like the actual recycling number. And then it's divided by the total tonnage that we get at our landfill. So that's the trash. And then it adds back in that recycling amount. So it's that kind of proportion, I guess. Recycling divided by disposal plus recycling.
Okay, that's helpful. I thought it might have more to like of total what could be recycled. We are recycling at a rate of 54%, but it's really of our total waste stream.
Yeah, total, it's called generation. Yeah, garbage plus recycling. Yeah, the total amount that's generated. So.
Sean.
Huh? So this slide is just kind of a look ahead of like what does zero waste of resources look like by 2030, right? So if we're successful in this program, you can see a lot of amazing things here, right? 465,000 less tons of waste being thrown away, right? If we're actually going to recycle this, all the paper and things like cardboard that comes up in our trash right now, that could save 1 million or more trees, right? I mentioned earlier, this is like about 100,000 tons of food, and of the edible portion of that could feed 92,000 people a year. It's also want to highlight, potentially 500 or more green jobs are created, right? So RePlus can really be a job growth engine. New capital projects are going to have to be built to process this waste. We're going to need people to pick up the waste and transport it. So a lot of new green jobs could be created. 24 million in future disposal cost avoidance. So this is us assuming that we export waste in the future. And so if we're not exporting 465,000 tons, you multiply that by the per ton rate to export it, and that could save us again $24 million there. And then the 150,000 fewer barrels of oil burn, that's based on the amount of plastic that also gets thrown away. And instead of throwing it away, it actually gets recycled again we can save a lot of burning of oil there. So a lot of really great benefits, tangible benefits to mitigating climate change as well. So.
John, we do have a question from Anne.
Sure.
Hey, John, I was just wondering if these are annual numbers, so every year we would save this much?
Yeah, so really let's see, the tons of waste, that's about annual. A million trees is annual. The food is annual. I think the only one that's not is actually the 500 green jobs created. That's saying like if we were able to, reduce our tonnage from that 800,000 to somewhere in the 400,000 range, it could potentially create 500 new jobs. So.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. So this one, yeah, so organics, so that's the food waste, the yard waste, and the wood waste. That makes up 28%. At that 800,000 earlier, right, that gets thrown away. So this is one of our initial focuses because it's such a big piece of the pie, right? And so this first set of actions is what we're calling RE+ Fast Start actions. So this one of the first ones is this Washington State organics legislation. This actually passed earlier this year. It was called House Bill 1799. And it was a comprehensive organics management bill that would improve access to organics collection, strengthen food donation and rescue in the state, and then support end markets for compost. There's also a component to this actually that would increase organics collection from businesses. So it's going to require businesses to start separating out their waste, right? You may go to like a mall or something, and right now, when you're done with your food at the food court, you just got to throw it in the garbage can, right? So what this is going to do is going to say, no, you need to have a garbage and a compost bin for people to throw their food scraps. So that'll start kicking in 2024. It'll start with kind of the larger businesses, and then each year kind of ramp down to the medium and smaller size businesses. But that'll unlock, I think we're thinking there's 130,000, I want to say, or no, 65,000 tons of food there. So a pretty big opportunity to get that food, to compost it or something else. Actually, I'll talk about that something else later in a sec. Single family organics collection. So one area you want to focus is not just on businesses, but also on single families, right? And we don't have requirements in the unincorporated area of King County to have organics collection. So there's an opportunity there to increase diversion as well. Right now, we're in this phase where we want to conduct outreach to help us determine what actions to take there. And some of those actions could include requiring curbside collection, organic subscription from residences in the unincorporated area. Implementing a food waste ban. So this would be similar to like a yard waste ban, right? You're not allowed to put your grass clippings in your garbage can, for example. Or I mentioned this earlier, reducing garbage collection to every other week. So those are kind of three of the options we're exploring. And once we get the feedback, then we'll, look at doing some co-changes and things like that. The hope here is that, we're sort of leading the way here. So there's some cities that currently don't have, some of these things like required or subscription service. So we're hoping to lead the way there and have some other cities participate as well. And then non-residential food waste recycling. I know it's total government speak, but earlier I mentioned this House bill that was going to require businesses to start separating out their food. So we want to find some other ways, to process that food. So we're really kind of we're exploring like, could we put it through an anaerobic digestion system or a co-digestion system in partnership with our wastewater treatment division. So exploring some options there to manage that commercial food waste that's unlocked. So. Next slide. So plastic, paper, and other materials, this makes up about 26%. I mentioned EPR earlier, right? It's extended producer responsibility. That was actually in the state legislation this year. Unfortunately, it did not pass, but we're hoping it'll pass this next time around, next May. So again, that's about asking producers to start managing their paper and plastic packaging, right? So it'd be like increasing how we're able to process it and some of the communications and education around it. Mixed waste processing. So this is, we call this the last screen for recyclables. Our effort is definitely upstream, right, around waste prevention and getting people to put things in the right bucket. That always doesn't happen though, right? I mean, still, things will still end up in the garbage can. And so this is just, so there's some technologies out there that can take that garbage stream and start to kind of find some of that stuff and sort it out and still send it to, for processing. Through, using conveyor belts technology, cameras, robots, all that stuff. Then the next two, we have Next Cycle Washington and RE+ Circular Economy Grants. So Next Cycle Washington is a statewide program. I tend to describe it as like a business accelerator, like a business incubator program, right? It's really trying to get brand new businesses off the ground in the waste prevention and diversion space. And then RE+ Circular Economy Grants is actually we set aside $2 million each biennium in the solid waste division for these grants, and this is open to the community, businesses, NGOs. And really, to me, this is about getting those kind of small and medium-sized businesses to the next level. So we had about 48 applicants this last round, I think it was like a month or two ago. And so we're kind of sorting through that, and we'll announce some of the winners here pretty soon. But yeah, so these are just some of the actions we're taking on plastic, paper, and other materials.
Could you provide a little more detail on the extended producer responsibility? Maybe one was proposed and what the bill that didn't pass, and then how other Western states, if there's any differences between how that was proposed and what's already been approved in other states. It'd be great to just get a quick download on what that looks like.
I'll try my best. I'm not the subject matter expert on this. I know like what it involved though was like creating kind of like an oversight organization, so to speak, right? Like with producers and I think collection companies and haulers, et cetera, to kind of oversee how a program like this could be implemented. So it's yeah, it would involve like asking the producers to pay for this program and pay for the oversight board to make sure that they're hitting the recycling targets. And the way they would hit the recycling targets is again through like changing what their packaging is made out of. So if it's currently not recyclable, like moving to something that is recyclable, and then doing more in the communication and education space, I think to get consumers to know, which is the right bin to put that packaging or not. So. And I think it's modeled off of like, it's very similar to like the California bill. I think a bill in Maine that also passed as well. But I can get back to you with some more information. I can talk to our EPR guy and send you some more info. Okay. And then the last space is around community. So we've been meeting with the community panel of 10 frontline members in the community. To really help us identify, what are their priorities and attitudes around the program, and like where should we focus on next. Another thing we've been doing, or we're going to implement next year, is a city grant proposal. So this is different from that REPA circular grant program I just mentioned. This is a separate pot of money. It's just for cities, and it's really to help cities, further bolster their waste prevention and recycling efforts. And then the city-county collaboration. So this is really a resurrection of something we had pre-pandemic. It's really us meeting with city recycling coordinators and trying to get on the same page, standardizing messaging around waste prevention and recycling, and again, kind of talking through some new actions we can implement there. So. And this is just kind of a summation of a lot of those numbers that were on the slides. You can see this is what we estimate the impacts to be. It's a pretty big diversion, right? That's 400,000 tons being diverted from the landfill. When you convert that to the greenhouse gas reductions, 200 to 300,000 tons in metric tons of CO2 equivalent annually. I did one of those calculator things, and that 300,000 is the equivalent of reducing emissions from a car driving 744 million miles. So it's a lot, if we're successful in diverting and preventing this waste. There are some things to consider though, right? So it takes money to implement these actions, right? And so as we're implementing new capital projects or, adding staff to do this, rates will likely increase in order to increase the diversion. Behavior change, right? I think someone mentioned this earlier, right? It's about having people put the right thing in the right bucket, right? Instead of just throwing everything in the trash. So behavior change is definitely needed. Again, on the flip side though, this is a job generator, right? As mentioned earlier, we need people to process this stuff. We need people to pick it up. We need people to build capital facilities, right? So things like that. So, there's a lot of great benefits to it, and just a few things to consider as well. So. I think I just have one more slide. So this is just kind of bringing it back to that survey that we talked about. So this just shows the level of support for a lot of those things that I just mentioned. Right, I talked about mixed waste processing, EPR, or extended producer responsibility, the state organics, all that stuff. And so you can see the lowest one of these still had a 75% support rate based on our survey. So, again, I think it's just a good touch point that, residents really care about the environment. They care about waste prevention and recycling, and it kind of shows out through the survey results. So. I think that's it for me. And yeah, happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you, John. We have a couple of questions, or a few questions, starting with Nancy.
I just have a quick question. I think one of the things that I've noticed in the recycling program is there's a lot of new products that have come out more recently, and I don't know what bin it goes in specifically. And I think there needs to be more education. For example, I'll just give you my favorite example. What do you do with the Amazon bags that come to your house every day? Are they recyclable? Are they garbage? Or what? And I think that kind of education, it's not very clear, and there's a lot of those bags out there. So that's just one example.
For sure.
I think Nancy.
Yeah,
Tom.
Starbucks cup. What do you do with a Starbucks cup, right? That's the I don't know the answer. I want to I want to know the answer to that one. So
Yes, Tom Anderson here. To help me understand jurisdiction now, you spoke a number of times about the collaboration between city and county, but so is it not the case that the county has no jurisdiction in the incorporated cities? And so if you put together a program like this, it would have no application to those areas unless you get buy-in from the cities. Is that correct?
in many cases, yeah, it'll take effort at the city, state, and county level, and even like consumer and business level to make a lot of these actions happen, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, Rishi?
Yeah, hey John, I just had a question about whether there have been any like initiatives or considerations as to particularly bringing in the RePlus program to schools, perhaps through the King Green Schools program, because I know still after the pandemic, we don't have any compost collection, so all of our food pretty much goes into garbage, and so that's a huge waste generator right there, and it's like a hub just generating food waste because that's where we all eat food every day during school. In the cafeteria. So I'm wondering if there's any RePlus programs there.
I mean, we've touched on it. You know, the Green Schools program is in our recycling section, and they're big players on the RePlus team as well. So I know there's coordination there. Again, the focus was kind of more on new actions, but yeah, definitely think we want to loop back in with the Green Schools program and like how do we sort of weave in RePlus language in there. And maybe like what are some new kind of messaging or curriculums for that thing as well. But I'd say right now, just kind of capacity and resource constraints, it's been more focused on like what are these new things such as like EPR or implementing the statewide organics bill, things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a good point to make. And yeah, I'll bring it back to the recycling group. So.
Anything else, Rishi?
No.
All right, Ann, you are up next.
Hey, John, yeah, it sounds like a great program, and looking forward to helping it be a success. So one of the things right now that I think is a concern with a lot of folks who pick up the garbage is the wish cycling.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that plastic is like the worst thing. Plastic seems really confusing because I think in some cases, it's just like number 1 and number 2 is recyclable, and then a lot of them are like 5s and 7s. So I like the idea of bringing it all together so everybody is on the same page. So I imagine you're thinking about that, right? About plastic.
Yeah, we have something called the Recycle Right Consortium. So it's made up of communication staff, I think Seattle's, Bellevue, and a couple other cities. And so that's like our communication marketing messaging arm. I know one of the things that came out of that group, I think it was 3 years ago, was like we should just stop collecting plastic bags in the recycling bin, right? Like we did a whole video about showing how it gets into the material recovery facility, and they have like a bunch of spinning things, and like they have to like shut everything down to get those plastic bags out of there. So that was a big push a couple of years ago. We should stop putting it in the blue bin. It doesn't belong there. The best thing is to take it back to like a Target or QFC. Now there's Ridwell, right? Ridwell takes plastic bags as well. And if you can't do any of that, then like it's better to just put it in the trash can instead of kind of slowing things down on the recycling side or even contaminating a lot of those streams. But that is where I think that extended producer responsibility comes into play quite a bit, right? Because the focus is around plastic and paper packaging. And so the hope there is that like that oversight group and getting those producers on board will really mitigate one, the use of plastic in general, right? But two, it's like if it is used, yeah, here's the right place to take it back to, or which bin to put it in. So
Cool. Great project.
great.
John, if you like looking at, and I guess this doesn't necessarily have to be specific to Issaquah, but I'm just curious, like, you've told us about the program, but like what from the city, what from this board, what from citizens, like what are like those things, the wish list, or what you're really looking for, buy into the general kind of ethos, or just curious of like those specific items that you're looking at and saying, these are important things that you should be looking at if you want to advocate for this program.
Yes, I think one of the first things we're looking for is we have what's called the RE+ pledge out there. We've been working with our advisory committees and cities on, it would be similar to like the K4C commitment, right? So we're trying to get that regional commitment to the program, right, to the goal and everything. As mentioned earlier, right, it takes city, state, county, kind of a regional effort to do this. So that's kind of the first thing, is we want to go out to cities and secure some of those pledges. And then I think after that, yeah, it's really a conversation about like, what more support can we provide? Like, I know we've kind of talked about, is there specific like contract language that like cities should include in their contracts with haulers, right, to increase recycling, right? I mentioned earlier there was big support around harmonized recycling lists, right? So again, recycling that gas can is the same everywhere, right? Instead of like it's different in one city versus another. So I think it's like trying to get cities to kind of coalesce around that harmonized recycling list. That way there is less confusion. I think part of it is when we implement the statewide organics bill, again, we'll have to go into businesses and ask them to start behavior change, right? They need to start, bringing in, they need to sign up for that food waste collection service. They need to set aside, space to have that extra bin. They need to have signs up and stuff. So it will require technical assistance, and we're going to provide some of that as well. But, if we can get cities to also help out with the businesses in their jurisdiction, I think that would be a big help as well. So yeah, it's definitely broad reaching. I think that city county collaboration is another area, right? If you have a representative on there, again, it's kind of weighing in on sort of what is the standard unified approach we can take on some of these actions too. So.
Okay. And on that same note, are there specific areas that, like, as you guys look down the list of what you would want or need from cities to participate in this pledge, like, are there areas that you're aware of that Issaquah is not kind of like, you have the slide of where the county's performing well, where it's not performing as well. What's that slide for Issaquah?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have the answer. I guess I'm not sure I want to provide an answer without knowing more about about how your system is doing on some of those things. But cities have a lot of control over, again, those like kind of hauling contracts, right? And how those are set up and sort of what is designated as recyclables. So it might be good to kind of take a look at what's in your guys' list compared to everybody else's, seeing how far off we are on some things there. So.
Yeah, because I do think one area that, at least for this board, it might be different. Your audience might be different if you're talking to staff, or I would personally be curious to see that list of like where do we stand, what are those opportunities? Because I think that is one of the great benefits of that. From sitting in your seat, you have probably a better look as to what other cities are doing and probably what's going on nationally that we might not. And so I do think that really helpful to understand just what we should be thinking about, or what we might consider as priorities for everything that we're doing on our own internal planning. And so
yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I'll bring that back to our recycling folks, and I think we would want to coordinate with your recycling folks too, just to make sure we're all on the same page there too.
Cool, thank you. That was everything I had. Stacy.
Sorry, I realized I don't have a name card. Just one quick comment and then a question for the board. Something we've noticed through the Lead for Cities program, where we've been gathering a lot of data, is that our diversion rates are slipping, not in a good direction. So essentially more waste is going to waste as opposed to recycling. And so I think that's something that we'll be working on with Recology, with their new zero waste employee that will work directly with Issaquah under the new contract. And then the question I had for the group, as John mentioned, this pledge. Wondering if the environmental board wants me to bring that back for consideration, discussion at a future meeting, and we could have a conversation whether that's something that should go before council.
Okay. Anybody else?
Nods, thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, John, I'll coordinate with you and your team about how we could bring that pledge back to this board for consideration, discussion, and recommendation.
Cool.
All right, any other questions? I did see a couple more slides at the end of this. Is that topics that someone else will be covering, or in this agenda item?
We have like one master slide deck, and so rather than have like 15 different versions, we sort of turn certain slides on and off depending on the audience. So, but yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, well,
I just have one quick one. It's not a question, but as you're looking at potentially, this is Nancy Davidson, doing commercial business recycling, particularly for food waste. Those of us in East King County have some large animals that come through our areas, and so that's one of the things you're gonna want to be thinking about is the bear population and the raccoons. It'll affect businesses. It affects residents, but it will then go to the business community. So we're gonna have to think long and hard about how this will impact businesses along the way as the bears move into a different area to eat.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
I might just say one more thing, if it's okay. So PCC used to have a digester, and they would put everything into it. I don't know what happens with the meat, but that's just a thought. And then they would turn it into fertilizer and sell the fertilizer.
So yeah, one of the really jargony term that non-residential food waste recycling. That was one of the things we're looking at is there's something called co-digestion where you can take all the food waste, you kind of you turn into a milkshake basically, and then you kind of pump that milkshake into a wastewater treatment plant, and it kind of turbocharges the gas production there. So that's definitely one of the things we're analyzing a lot further. So.
Is that used as fertilizer then?
So it creates energy, and then it's because it's through the wastewater treatment process. I think it increases their biosolids as well. So that is used as land application. I think in eastern Washington.
All right. Thank you, John. I'm just going to summarize everything that I at least captured in my notes.
Sure.
Environmental board, please, if there's anything that I missed, please let me know. Some of the feedback was around questions about getting this program into schools and how they might better get incorporated with the Green Schools program. Curious about education and more outreach on basically letting people know what is and is not recyclable, and how what people can do to not ruin their waste or recyclables with things like plastic bags. There was interest in just the general specific actions that the city of Issaquah could take, and how Issaquah might match up against other cities. There was the potential of bringing back the pledge, as that was one of the items that King County team mentioned as an action that the city or this board might be able to do to help support what they're working on. Let's see, and then there was concern or just interest in making sure that wildlife was being considered during the business implementation portion of the organics program. So any other items that I missed in that?
Just the EPR, getting more information on the EPR. I'm not sure if you shared that, and I can pass that along to the board, especially ahead of the legislative session.
Great. Well, appreciate the team joining. Anything else that your team needs from us?
I think I talked a lot, so I'm done. I just really appreciate your time. That's a lot of information to digest, and I really appreciate the questions too. It shows you guys are really interested in this topic too. So really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks to you. I think with that, we are ready to move on to our next topic, the natural environment checklist presented by Christian Getz and Doug Yormick. You two can take it away. And then I'll ask the same question, just how you would like to handle questions as we go through this. So if you can provide that feedback so we know going in, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. All right. Glad to be here tonight in person.
Welcome.
And in my third week here with the city. So my name is Christian Getz. I'm the new planning manager with the CPD department. With me tonight online is Doug Yormick, highly experienced planner, done a lot of environmental projects, SEPA review, stream, wetland, shoreline stuff. So he's there to help me out if I stray, or if there's questions that are a little more process or historically detailed that I'm unable to answer. So tonight, yeah, we're here to look at a couple things, project overviews, the last ones that we've had since the last time the group met. This is our annual review. So I'm going to run through those really quickly, pretty high level, and then get into a policy discussion. So a discussion where we're looking for input from the board on what your thoughts are on the checklist, if it's operating the way in which you thought, are there questions that we should be asking, information we should be seeking at that initial stage. So yeah, it's for those that are new, the checklist is it's completed at the initial stages of the project, so it's very preliminary in its form. It's completed by the reviewing planner, and that review and the completion of that is based on the information proposed by the applicants, materials that they provide, information that the city may already have on a subject property. And with many projects taking multiple years to complete, there can be quite a gap between that initial preliminary checklist completion and going through the entire review process, the entire site visit, peer review of streams, wetlands, and the like, before it wraps up, which can be many, many years.
I just have a quick question. Since Title 18 is being updated and it's going to change many of the rules for these projects, are you going to start creating a box that says, are you under the old rules, the old Title 18, and you now have to apply to the new Title 18? I'm just asking the question because
No,
the rules are changing.
Very good question, and it adds to the complexity of this discussion quite a bit, where there's so much that's going to be happening. So there's that Stephen's going to be much more familiar with, and Doug's going to be much more familiar with. The way we might want to be asking questions in the future. We'll be looking at vesting and projects that are under the current codes. They'll follow those, that checklist that is established, and those that are under the new code when it's in effect will follow the new updated checklist if it changes. So looking for that insight from you tonight in a discussion, and I've got about 12 slides really quickly just to kind of give everybody an understanding of where we are with these projects. The first one is Avalon Bay, which is a redevelopment of a 4-acre parcel in central Issaquah. They initially proposed a 7-story mixed-use building. I believe the initial proposal had underground parking. In a floodplain, it's not necessarily the greatest idea. They've come back and changed that a bit, but it is with on-site parking. There are critical areas on-site, immediately off-site, and we're still working through that process. So they're working towards completion of their land use permitting, and then submitting. Their plan is to be submitting prior to the new Title 18 update to the current code. But right at this point, we do not have construction permits for this project. It is still within the land use review.
Are they considered vested then?
They will not be considered vested unless they have a building permit.
That's when you get vested in the city, you have to have a building permit.
Or
So it's vested.
development agreement. There's some complexities within
Thank
certain
you.
areas. Yes.
Sorry to
Yep.
interrupt, but I was curious when they're vested.
Yeah.
I had a quick question. The red on the previous slide, what is it looks like it's also, is it like a flood? Or is it? a
Those
wetland, or what is
are
it?
slopes, I believe. No, those are wetlands. The pink
Okay.
is slopes. Yes. Yes.
Is the footprint of the new 7-story building going to be larger than the business that is going to be demolished?
It's larger than the footprint of the current building, but that, where that can be is still being worked out with like buffers, through block pathways, all of those aspects of the Central Issaquah plan that have to be incorporated on the regulatory side, outside of just critical area review.
Thank you.
The next project, this one is Doug, so he could pipe in if he's got any insight on it. The Highland Pump Station, which is a stormwater pump station that's proposed as a 24-inch diameter pipeline, runs about 3,000 linear feet from the Rowley property out to Lake Sammamish. It's a direct discharge to Lake Washington through a wetland. It's a type 1 wetland that's it's running out through, that's within the shoreline management area. So it is subject to the shoreline master program and the state codes, which will then require a shoreline variance. So the highest bar to meet for that activity to occur. And we are still waiting on construction permits to be submitted for this one. So still in land use review at this point, and working through that with stormwater and critical area review, our consultants.
Says that this one's gonna be owned by the city after completion?
It will be owned by the city. It'll be taken over by the city. So the city is invested in making sure what's built will operate, can be operated by Public Works when it's done. The next one is the Edwards plat. It's a 10 lots, short plat, proposing cluster housing. So pushing that cluster housing to the east, which would be the right side of the screen. Class 2 stream, coal mine hazard, steep slopes on this site, relatively encumbered. So you can see where they're proposing that to be placed. At this time, only a preliminary plat is in. They will vest once a final plat is approved. So they're still needing to wrap up a few more parts. But they're considering the existing buffers of the stream, maintaining that as a single family development. The Issaquah School District Stream Bank Stabilization. I took a walk the other day and I found this one. Pretty cool little project with a lot of large woody debris installed in central Issaquah. And so it is the only one that is in construction or is in process. They met the work window to be in the stream the end of last month. Very, very close to the end of that ability. And they'll be wrapping that up with all the agencies and Doug and our inspection group to make sure that it's planted and vegetated after the logs have been set here.
We saw some of the woody debris on the way here.
Yes, they had some on.
It's off the side of the. Yeah.
Oh, is that?
I don't know, it
The
looked
one on
like woody
Newport?
debris.
It's on Newport.
Yeah.
Well, it was
Yeah,
woody
this one.
debris, whether it's going in here, I don't know.
They found extra. They bought extra.
Makes sense.
And the last one on the list, the Milano Apartments. This one is still in land use review, waiting on construction permits. 7-story, 104-unit apartments, class 2 stream to the east southeast, and a category 3 wetland with steep slopes. So they're again looking to complete their land use review and come in for their construction permits and have complete applications so they can vest under the current regulations. And all of these have gone through their neighborhood meetings, completed their preliminary what I keep calling it a preliminary environmental checklist at the beginning of the project. So those are the examples, or the projects that we've had. So what we're seeking is kind of that high level policy review and input on the functionality of the checklist and how it relates to the city's environmental goals. What this group is seeking to follow, and which can be a little tricky since Title 18 is in flux and it is in process. So like what I think Connie had said, what are some measurables? What are things that the board would want to see as a result? And that's kind of when projects are completed, and how to measure that. So just want to open it up for a discussion.
Well, I have a question while maybe others gather their questions. So, and you even use the word preliminary, like I would, so we do this preliminary checklist. Is that updated throughout the life of a project? Is the end checklist that would come out of a given project what it was at the start, or what it was at the end, like in terms of variances and other details that might be included in that checklist?
Right. I'll start, and Doug, chime in if you want. It is a checklist that staff will utilize to run down through and see what are the features on the site, what is the applicant proposing, are they proposing limiting light impacts on the critical area. From what we can tell with the plans that are proposed, have they addressed certain features on the site? So kind of a literal review checklist for staff to follow along and make sure that we're using it as a tool in our initial screening of the process. And then through peer review with our consulting biologists, once we have their full report, that gets into the details and into the weeds with the critical area code and determining if it is consistent. So it is not updated in the future. It is a static, frozen in time from the initial pre-neighborhood meeting steps. Doug, you want to add anything?
Doug, I'll unmute you.
Thanks, Stacy. This is Doug Yormick, Associate Environmental Planner. I don't really have anything to add. I think Christian got everything correct with that.
Okay. Thank you. Nancy, go ahead.
And what's the form?
Oh, Ann, go ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. I guess mine's more of a comment. So I love the new concept of going tall. When I first moved here in 1984, it was go wide. You weren't allowed to go more than like 2 stories, I think is what it was. So I like the idea of encouraging people to build up. But as far as the wetlands, I just think we need to remember to take climate change into mind as these new buildings go in, because there's going to, of course, I think we all know there's going to be more flooding happening. So the 100-year floods could happen a lot more often, even more often than they do now. And when I first moved here in the 80s, there were a ton of 100-year floods happening, and the water was managed then. And so then, Lombardi's and the Antique Mall quit flooding for a while, but that could change again. So just some thoughts.
Sam, Nancy?
So Christian, you weren't here when we've discussed this before, but I'm trying to think back to what our responsibilities are under when the board was set, and I don't have a computer in front of me, but I think we were trying to come up with a scorecard of how we're doing environmentally, that we could report annually to like the council or the community. How many wetlands were impacted, how many significant trees were taken down, how the steep slopes were being affected. So we kind of see, are we doing better as an environmental community, or are we harming it? Am I making any sense on that? And I'm not sensing we're getting there, if that. I think we need to think about, if we're only doing the checklist at the initial parts, because during the course of development, the developer's probably moving the building a little bit because they're getting feedback about wetland impacts and stuff. And I think it's important for us to be able to communicate to the community, how are we doing environmentally? We received 20 applications this year, 5 of which were commercial developments. In those commercial developments, we managed to meet all the buffer requirements, or some kind of report card about how are we doing as a community. And that to me is what I see this checklist helping us to do. The checklist is a way to accumulate these projects on a common basis so we can report to the community how we're doing. And I'm not sure we're there yet.
Building in potentially some metrics.
Right, there you go.
And adaptive management monitoring.
Right.
Essentially.
Does that help you a little bit?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of really what we were thinking this was trying to get to. And we've had those communications with the former planning manager of what we were trying to get to with it. And the initial projects we saw, there weren't enough, like we're seeing now, of major developments coming in that are trying to meet some goals. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to build those metrics and perhaps tweak the checklist or process so that we can report out how are we doing.
Okay, that's great.
Thanks, Nancy. Tom?
Yeah, my question is it overlaps with what Nancy was just talking about. You're seeking feedback on this checklist and the process. And I'm wondering, well, what other feedback mechanisms are you looking at to determine the goodness of this checklist and process? Is it just us? It probably isn't just us, but I'm just wondering what other feedback loops there are. In terms of like continuous process improvement, the conventional way to get a feedback loop is to evaluate at the end of a project and use what you learned in that evaluation, the post-project debriefing or analysis, and let's see what went right, what went wrong, and use that as the feedback mechanism to continuously improve, both from a process perspective and a project perspective. I guess I feel just I don't have enough information to look at the checklist and look at these examples and determine whether it's working well or not, because I can't see the outcome yet. It's too early for these projects to know what the outcome is. And is there some other step in the process that we'll be looking at that in the future? If there isn't, I'd suggest there should be. And I'm not sure how that best could be done, but I feel like I don't have enough information to provide good feedback on it from where I'm sitting right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Rishi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was wondering, one, I apologize, this is like common knowledge, but I'm wondering for the checklist itself, like what are the current metrics? Are they what we've seen in the presentation, or are they also about like the actual like emissions related to the development of these 5 projects?
It is a series of questions about what's on site, what are they proposing. So it doesn't necessarily get into the details of number of units, square footage of structure. It's looking at, is there a wetland on site? Are there steep slopes on site? How are they accounting for that? Have they provided the report? There's a few more detailed ones. Are they trying to avoid certain areas of the property? And that's where there are other questions we want to look at initially to then go back and say, well, how many square feet of wetland were determined on the site initially? How much was there at the end? Was any of it mitigated? Was it a highly functioning wetland? I mean, very generic, very general. Was it a deteriorated wetland that's covered in blackberries and reed canary grass, or was it a highly functioning wetland? The gain is when it's a low functioning wetland that development occurs, they observe the wetland buffers and they enhance that area, so it's a net gain for that site. And so kind of things that could be considered, especially at a high level of what's the condition of the wetland. It doesn't take much more to say, well, it's highly functioning or it's a low functioning, and that's a checkbox that further into the review, staff have that information. We may have it up front as well. Thought to throw out.
Okay, thank you.
Don, go ahead.
Yeah, so Nancy pretty much stole the words out of my mouth. I was trying to articulate myself, but she beat me to it. She recalled it quicker than I did. But yeah, that was the original intent, was that this was supposed to be a measurable process. So I'm going to give you a suggestion. This is your preliminary checklist. How about as your project closes out, you have a closing checklist, and maybe it can be one and the same. Something along the lines of, have you met the goals of the original intent? And I heard Connie make a comment earlier that she remembered that this was supposed to be a very quick and easy to read spreadsheet, if you will, so we can see how we're doing over time. So consider what that would look like. I don't have a solution for that. Something you have to think about for a while, but something you could put up, on a website where people can simply go there and just look over the past few years, how have we done this?
And potentially looking at these 5 projects, the projects before that have used the checklist that might still be wrapping up out in the field. I haven't looked into those, but there's the opportunity to, as they wrap up, actually have something to come back with. And that tracking or that reporting grows, where you might not see these 5 projects or a few of these for a couple of years once they wrap up, but when they do, if we're looking through a follow-up checklist, we're providing something that is a report card.
And you mentioned, just as an example of what you mentioned, a deteriorating wetland buffer. It'd be interesting to know over time, okay, how many acres of a deteriorating wetland buffer was replaced or renewed via these projects?
Thanks, Don. Nancy, go ahead.
And building on what Don's added to it, I mean, I think it's a unique opportunity with the kind of projects you just presented. They do have some significant wetland opportunities or impacts and steep slopes, things that we're all kind of concerned about in this community, and actual stream restoration work down there with the school district's work. So I think we finally got the projects that we can start to report to the community how we're doing environmentally. It's just how to do that.
Sure.
That's what they pay you the big bucks for.
Yeah, maybe I'll hop in now. I mean, I do think, echoing a lot of what was already said, I think I'll put it slightly differently. I feel like right now the environmental checklist is like demographic data. We're not actually getting to like the outcomes from like, we're doing a study of like subjects. We're getting the demographic data up front in the checklist. We're not actually getting the outcomes, which I think for this board and for the policies and what we discuss on an ongoing basis, I think the outcomes in a lot of cases are just as or more important than what the starting points were. So I do think figuring out a way to okay, maybe we do still need everything that's in the current checklist for the demographic, just the basics as the starting point in this process. But at the end of the day, I think looking at Title 18, we've talked about a lot of different topics, whether it's shoreline, wetland, like we have all these policy decisions that we're making in Title 18, or we will make in Title 18. I think we should probably be measuring and looking at that list of what are the changes we made in Title 18? How are those changes either changing how a project comes to life? Like, how is that benefiting or detracting from key measures of like wetlands or other tree canopy? I think we're gonna have a lot of things coming out of like the tree canopy banks. I don't know where that's at, if that's still in Title 18. But there's a lot of things in wetland banking. I'm curious, and I think what we've shared in the past before you were joined is I think we're interested in really understanding. So there's code, how are people using that? at the end of the day. And we have a really interesting opportunity with Title 18 that I think we have focused as a city on certain areas. So let's see how those changes are actually being implemented in projects going forward. There's probably other things that weren't changes that we should still be looking at. And I think that's where I would be interested in, like, yeah, going from that next step of like demographic to outcomes and like key measurables coming out of a process of, or for a project. But I do think with Title 18, we have a really unique opportunity to start measuring how we did with Title 18 through these checklists as well. So that I think is going to be something that we should certainly probably bring back and come back and discuss once Title 18 is finalized. But I do think that this is a unique time that we'll have that opportunity. And I think, yeah, I think that's the majority of my comment. But I do think while the checklist is a good starting point, I think at the end of the day, where we need to get to is more like, you couldn't use these checklists. Someone would have to read through every single one, and then they still might not get a lot of like, okay, what mattered at the end of the day? And I do really think that at the end of the day, like the community, this board, the staff and city that Stacy's reporting back to, I think we need to figure out a way to be able to share the impacts or the lack of impact that we're having. And I think right now it's really challenging. And so something that I mentioned in the last time we talked about this, I really do think a way to aggregate across a year the impacts, and that might be slightly different than what the individual project checklist does. I'm sure a lot of the things you might track in the checklist or whatever we end up calling it will ladder up or be something that you would report on in that. But I do think the end of the year report, I would be really interested to see is more summary level and how do we take from all the projects that not only this year, but in the recent history and understand whether we were happy with the outcomes or not. Like if the public was to look at this at the end of our report out at the end of a given year, would they be happy? Should they be happy or should they not be happy? And I think that right now is hard to do. So yeah, work in progress, but I think we have a really interesting opportunity coming up. Any other questions or feedback? Christian, do you have any other specific questions or things that you would like feedback on?
I don't think so. I think that covers what my questions were, especially very bright-eyed and unencumbered. Yeah.
Sorry. But I think it's really interesting, some of these projects, like the redevelopment of that site along Newport. You know, they're gonna take a bunch of asphalt parking out, which is probably, and they may end up putting in, the stuff that percolates, what's it called, Don, come on, the permeable concrete or permeable asphalt, so that it's now cleaning it up. And I think that's something we can report out. We removed 2 acres of asphalt. We removed, and replaced it with this, benefiting the streams. It had a light generating source from the windows that affected, nearby areas. And now they've decreased that light. They're turning the lights off. They had old lighting fixtures in there that were the old incandescent bulbs. Now they have all LED bulbs. Those are the things to me that the people in the community would like to know about. And I think that's kind of where I'm hoping we might be thinking about going. Because I really think it could be a really cool report if they're doing the right things with the buildings.
It could be a win-win for the city and the developer. Thinking what Nancy's just saying. I mean, if I'm a developer and I get an opportunity to report out at the end of my project, the good things that I did to improve my area, I'd be really excited about that.
Put solar panels on, whatever it is, that type of thing.
Heat pumps.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to add all that. Just hit me.
All right. Unless we have any other questions, I'll try to summarize that. I mean, I think probably the biggest theme was the board's interest in hearing more about outcomes and scoring in something that would be more easily applied to like measurable metrics of our success or lack of success in protecting the environment. A couple other comments focused on one, the opportunity that we have with Title 18 to look at, are there some policy topics that we should be able to report on or evaluating against the prior code. Trying to think what else. Yeah, I mean, I think it was also mentioned several times just how this could be used as a resource to the community. I think right now, I mean, the checklist is used with the community, but how it could provide summary level guidance or reporting out of progress or lack of progress to the community. And it's not just an environmental board thing, it's something that could be a tool for the broader community to understand how the city and that year shaped up. Anything I missed?
Can you just clarify, were you interested in seeing, was the board interested in seeing a summary of the information in our end of the year report this year? Or is that something you're looking for in the future?
I think that's for everyone.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be in the report this year. We kind of punted last year because we didn't have much.
Yep.
And we may not have a lot more. But a start.
Okay, that sounds great. I can work with Christian on that. And then we talked about possibly coming back to the board in the spring to do kind of a check-in. That check-in could be, did we get it right? Is it the right level of the environmental board report prior to our next review summer? So we'll work on that and then plan on that check-in in the spring.
Great. Well, I think, Christian, anything else for us or?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
Great
Thank
meeting
you
you
for
all.
coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming and welcome.
Yeah,
Welcome.
good to meet you.
All right, with that, we will move on to reports. Really, Stacy, you'll probably have the most of that or all of it.
Give me 1 minute while I adjust my screen.
It's getting dark so early.
That's a bummer.
All right, Stephen, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you on my end. I haven't been able to move people into panelists tonight, so I'll go ahead and unmute you in case you want to jump in. Great. Well, tonight we just wanted to do kind of a brief update on where Title 18 is, and then also share with the board a crosswalk that's been developed. It's been shared a number of times, I think, with council, PPC. It's up on our website. It's been circulating a bit. And the purpose of this crosswalk was really to pull out the actions within the climate action plan that identified Title 18 as the means for implementation, and then to speak to where those are being addressed in Title 18 or are not being addressed, and why, and what the timeline is for those to be addressed. And so it was mostly just to update the board on this table, and Stephen are here to take any questions on where things are. And I might see also if Stephen wants to provide a quick update on where we are with Title 18 and what the board can expect to see at our November meeting.
Good evening, everyone. Stephen Badua, Long Range Planning Manager. So where we are with the Title 18 project is that we are getting past the second phase, which is the drafting of the code. And we're moving into the phase where we're consolidating the multiple drafts. As you're familiar, we broke up Title 18 into 6 different buckets. And so we're going to be conducting some code testing as we're consolidating the draft code. And then we'll be going into consolidated draft public hearings with the Planning Policy Commission in November. Can
So
everybody hear me? Okay.
hear you.
Okay.
Great, so this was really, we haven't, the staff haven't come to you with Title 18 in several months. We worked quite a bit on it, natural environment sections back in the spring. So just wanted to do a quick check-in here, provide this table, and see if there were questions, any areas of input that the board wants to further participate in. Recognizing that really our next check-in will be that November meeting where you'll be receiving the consolidated draft of Title 18 a couple weeks in advance for review.
Nancy, go ahead.
So Stephen, can you explain to me what the PPC is doing regarding, they're doing some kind of numeric scoring based on climate action plan. I read the meeting minutes from the last PPC meeting, and it appears that they're doing some work along that. Could you explain what they're really doing with that and the community values they're putting forward?
Are you referring to the ecological score when it comes to sustainability?
Yes.
PPC isn't doing anything with that right now. It was just a discussion if the city should be approaching how we are implementing sustainability through our work. It was the discussion that we had with the Planning Policy Commission was just to determine if we want to go that approach and how we might go that approach. It is currently identified as a future update item following this current project update. And so later next year, I think we'll be having a discussion of what that might look like as part of code updates or expanded implementation of ICAP as we're looking at how to incorporate more sustainability in our work. So there will be more discussions on what that might be, but there's currently no work being done by the Planning Policy Commission on that item.
So I know that you surveyed a lot of cities about that. So you looked at how that was being approached by many other communities in the county. Is that correct?
We did a peer city research to see how other cities are approaching green building design requirements. And the city of Redmond was one where it established an ecological score that provided flexibility around the requirements for green building design. And so they were basically creating an options list of requirements for developers to incorporate green building design in their developments.
So
we didn't find any other cities that approached it the same way.
So since this isn't coming as part of the current work associated with Title 18, I'd just like to request to the chair and the vice chair that perhaps as this gets further discussed next year after Title 18 is adopted, that it comes forward to this board for further discussion. Put that off now. I think it's important. Part of climate action.
Did you mean to put it upright again?
No. I meant to turn it down, but I was thinking
the action didn't match the
thoughts.
intention, Stephen, I have a question. I guess I'm reading just the first TL 1.1, incentivize dense mixed use and transit-oriented development, and then TL 1.3, adopt codes prioritizing missing middle housing. I guess as I look at the code applications towards those two items, which I think are, at least in my opinion, pretty critical to like Issaquah continuing to be a sustainable community, is developing in a way that is sustainable. I'm not sure that I see a lot of teeth or meat on the actions that are put against that. I mean, the missing middle housing, that seems like, and I don't know if this is the way it's intended, but given that there's no bolded parts of that, that seems to be the thing that we're saying we're not addressing in this update. So I'd be curious, given that this seems like a fairly, I mean, it's one of our goals, and I would argue that it doesn't really seem like we've made really significant updates. I mean, our one thing related to zoning is that we already do it, which I think if we had goals that I think with the process to improve, saying that we already have it is probably not what I think people would have expected at the beginning of the process. So just curious, that general topic, is it that there wasn't there's been focus on other areas, or why wasn't as much attention or parts of the code update applied to these portions of kind of the initial goals for this update?
And you're speaking to the first one that includes parking and zones, and then the third item more on the housing diversity and affordable housing?
Yeah.
The intention of this project has always been to kind of just clean up the code to really clarify what the regulations are and what we're requiring from developments. Going in, we looked at to see where we could make sure a lot of our policies and regulations are in line with our city plans. Some policies were able to change to better align with what our city plans are actually call out as action items. But there's other policies that have been identified for the future updates list where our city plans aren't exactly explicit about in terms of saying we need to require this, which is why we need to have further community conversations beyond it, which is why they're identified on this list, but also as a future updates item following this project update.
Okay.
Is there specific actions that you're looking for in those two areas?
Well, I guess no, I don't know enough to know what the actions we should be taking are. It just seems like there isn't a lot there. So if that is, and I don't know what, I can't remember the goals of Title 18 in the beginning. I don't know if that aligns with our CAP focus areas. But it just seems like that part of code hasn't really seen a lot of progress. And if this is our opportunity to do it, I'm just not sure, like, the next time we update this, like, our climate action plan will be an old document at that point. So I'm just curious. It feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. So that I think I just wanted to flag that I was concerned that we don't really seem to be addressing those items with enough substance to be meaningfully changing those two items.
I think that's fair. But I think I should clarify, this isn't the last time we'll be touching our city code. One thing that we've made clear with the city council is we plan on conducting an annual review of our code to, because we're doing such a large overhaul, we need to make sure everything is operating as we intended it to. Even when you're doing small sections of code, it never comes out perfect. So a full overhaul like this, we're expecting to have to make changes over time. And so we plan to revisit these sections on housing and parking and zones and green building design as we continue these conversations of how best to approach achieving the city goals, especially when it comes to implementing our other city plans.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I understand it. There's a lot of things to focus on such a major update. I guess the only last thing I would say is I understand we'll probably be making tweaks on an annual review. I don't know how likely big breaking changes will be, and that seems like what would be necessary to meaningfully move those items. So I do think that's a question I have, and the question I'm maybe shouldn't be asking as we're moving towards approving Title 18 is when is the next update of Title 18 coming? Because that just feels like maybe we're going to knock off some of our priorities now, but given the scope, it just seems like they're not just details that we might miss. There are really large areas that we may not have had the bandwidth to, which is understandable given the scope, but we may not have had the opportunity to address with as much attention as they might need or might need. So yeah, no, I know that you and your team have a ton on your plate, and this is a major update. So I think that was just my concern coming out of that as a result.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Any other questions or feedback? Actually, I do have one more question. I'll come right back to you, Nancy. In the last meeting that we had related to tree canopy, there was discussion around neighborhood limits, or not limits, but requirements for tree canopy. I don't see that mentioned here. Is that because it's either it's no longer the case, or is it just not included in the list on like 1.3 or the natural systems 1.3? Just curious if that was either missed from this list or if that's no longer kind of included in the current plans.
It's missed from the list. We're actually conducting that analysis right now, so we're incorporating some of that into the next draft.
Okay, because I think there's tree bank as well, or that's probably not the term, that maybe it's a different term, but okay. Sounds like it's not that anything is meaningfully changed from that tree canopy discussion, it's just that it wasn't included in this crosswalk. Okay. Nancy, go ahead.
So this is just a general question for you, Stephen. Can you lay out what kind of, we haven't heard much on Title 18. Where are you at? And kind of when's it going to council? And kind of how's your schedule now? Can you just give us the big picture of where you're going and when you think this will be the heavy council discussion that we're anticipating?
Sure. So for the next couple of months, Planning Policy Commission will be having discussions of comprehensive plan amendments. And then starting in November, the first meeting, or the 2 meetings in November, will be the public hearings on the consolidated draft, where we'll result in a recommendation going to council. And then we'll meet with the Planning, Development, and Environment Council Committee in December, and potentially again, either in December and early January. And then that'll kind of initiate that legislative process for Title 18 adoption. That can take 1 to 3 months, depending on how the discussions go with PPC and with the council committee in December.
And just another question, will this code amendment, it will be adopted by ordinance? Is that kind of how it's going to have to go forward?
Yes, it'll likely be adopted by multiple ordinances, but yes.
And the goal is to have that work completed by spring of next year? Is that because that's kind of a window.
Yeah, I would say that's the goal, because part of the intention for next year is to be initiating our comprehensive plan update, which will be a pretty significant effort. So the Title 18 updates will be rolling into that comprehensive plan update and discussions.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand the big picture, how this was coming down the pipe. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
All right, well, that looks like all the comments and questions. I think to summarize, there's definitely interest in understanding if an ecology score or something to that effect is incorporated, that interest in learning more about that and potentially discussing that at a future meeting. There are also concerns around how some of the current ICAP goals don't seem to be meaningfully addressed by this update, and then how will things that seem quite large updates be addressed for any future changes to Title 18 code. And then there's general interest in making sure we understood kind of where this stands in the process leading up to our next meeting that we have for this in November. Any other items I missed?
Good job, Jamie.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, everyone.
All right. Stacey, are there any more reports?
I was just going to walk through the board schedule and then a brief ICAP update.
Well,
Right now?
take it away.
All right. Great. One thing to just know, I'll resend that Title 18 schedule and also kind of the heads up to make sure you're saving some time before our November meeting to do a review. So I'll make sure to get that back out to the board. So just a few quick updates on the board schedule. We made a few adjustments to accommodate the addition of a parks meeting with us in December. So they'll be providing us an overview of the update to the park strategic plan that'll be coming in 2023. So that involved a little bit of shifting a few items around, and just wanted to highlight what is coming forward next meeting. We'll be looking at a final draft for your input on the ICAP dashboard as a update to the conversation we had, I think, back in June. We'll have the wastewater master plan coming forward. And then I believe we'll also be having a conversation on the CIP, both the overview, but then some discussions on environmental scoring of that. I need to confirm that conversation will be ready to come to us in October. One adjustment I did make here is we were looking to move forward a municipal building pathway for decarbonization. This would be just a commitment to at least do a review of all the city's buildings and identify the plan for decarbonization. We've lost our facilities manager, and then I'm also working to bring on a staff person that'll work a little bit more on the municipal operations side. So I think I'm going to postpone that till 2023, early 2023, because we're not quite ready for it, and I want to make sure we have our new facilities manager on board and working closely with us on that. Those are the major updates to the calendar for the rest of the year. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I did more of a comment. I actually think that this crosswalk was quite helpful. And I'm curious, like, especially looking at like parks, but also if we look at at the point that we're talking about transportation or some of the other updates, I do think it would be helpful to do something, like request something similar as part of that process. And I don't know how much there'll be that's relevant to parks from the ICAP, but yeah, that exercise I think would be helpful to identify some of the gaps that we saw in this Title 18 version.
Okay.
So that's something we can talk more about maybe when we check in next, but that does seem like an area that it'd be helpful to make sure that the city, not only us, that we can do that crosswalk, but also that being sure that has been communicated, those goals have been communicated to the teams and are being factored in on different plans that are coming up. And go ahead.
My question is off subject, but it's been something that I've been thinking about. Do we have any metrics on the Climate Action Challenge in regards to the ICAP?
Yes, we are. We'll be reporting some of that in the dashboard. The Climate Action Challenge is tracking the actions committed to and actions completed by participants and the amount of carbon reduced.
Okay.
So that's the kind of information. I think there are more metrics we can pull from it. I'll have to talk to the partner.
That's great. That's what I was telling people, and then I realized I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I can pull it up in a minute and show. Great. Any other questions or feedback on the remainder of the schedule before I launch into ICAP? Great. Well, I'll have a much more in-depth written ICAP update for you all in October. There's one that will be going to the council in mid-October, I believe, October. So I'll make sure to send that to the board so that you have that written update. But did want to just walk through a few highlights of things that have been going on over the last month or so. We are starting to work with Gibson Eck. There are a couple of staff there that have reached out that have been really interested both in internship opportunities around the ICAP, but then there is also in process a design lab, which is a 6-week course with students where they are looking at the Climate Action Challenge and trying to figure out ways to motivate people to get involved in that, but also to inspire behavior change. So they're going to be working on a number of different products that might help, or videos or testimonials, coming out of that. So I think a fun project to start engaging youth in implementation and get some creative ideas flowing. We're hoping to continue the partnership with Gibson Neck and have them dig deeper on other ICAP projects in the future.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to confirm that Climate Action Challenge, is that synonymous with the Eastside Climate Challenge?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Climate Action Challenge is the national name for it, but yes, thank you. Climate vulnerability assessment. We held our first community workshop, virtual workshop, just a week ago, I believe, and participated. It was just an hour-long workshop, really, mostly to introduce folks to the project that we're working on, but we did use it as an opportunity to do some engagement and get some input on different aspects of the vulnerability assessment. We had planned to do a more in-depth couple-hour workshop with the community last night in person. We did not get very many people to register for that, so we ended up canceling it. And we're going to pivot to either doing more virtual workshops or possibly an in-person workshop this winter that'll focus around proposed actions and possibly communication tools. There are going to be other ways for the community to engage this fall. We'll be launching an online open house so folks can get update on the project whenever they want. There'll be a mapping tool they can go in and identify areas of concern around the community. And then we'll also be launching a community survey. I'll share both of those with the board once they're ready. Heat pump campaign. We had our 4th workshop this afternoon. We had about 90 participants. That's been about the standard for each of the workshops. And we have over half to 75% of the participants at the end of each meeting stating that they'd like to be connected with an installer and move forward. We don't have any metrics yet on how many have moved forward signing a contract for installation, but we will be getting those reports soon. We have one more workshop scheduled for later this month, but we are planning to launch another series of workshops this fall. Getting a lot of questions on the Inflation Reduction Act, which has heat pump rebates. We're trying to learn as much as we can along with everyone else about timing and process for that, and we're providing information in the workshops as we learn more. But anticipate that will really grow awareness and interest of our communities for the heat pump transition. We also have some preliminary good news on a grant to help further expand that program and provide additional incentives for low moderate income as well as for market rate programs. So provide more information on that when it's official. Clean Buildings Initiative, we're working to get under contract with McDonald Miller to launch that program. This one's focused on the on building energy efficiency, in part to work with buildings that have to comply with the state standard, but we'll be opening up the opportunity for any building that wants to advance their energy efficiency, and still planning to do initial marketing. Community Climate Challenge, or Eastside Climate Challenge. We've been able to get some students engaged. I don't know, Rishi, if you're part, and there's a group of sustainability ambassadors that have kind of taken that on, which is exciting.
I'm connected with that effort.
Great. Yeah, it's starting to build more awareness and attention. We've been out at tabling at a number of events. That's been a really fun one to table at and getting a lot of community engagement. We've seen the numbers, I think, almost doubled, or we added 30 or 40 people just over the last week or two as we've kind of picked up tabling. We'll be at the Salmon on Sunset event Saturday, tabling and talking a lot about climate action connection to salmon, and then we'll be at Salmon Days as well. So stop by those booths if you're out and about. Let's see. Maybe just the last thing I'll mention is EV charging. We're still working to get under contract to put in both replacement chargers for some that are no longer working around the city, and then also put in some new charging stations. And these would be city-sponsored ones. So just taking a bit of process to get all those logistics worked out, but we plan to get those in this winter And then also continue to identify new locations for EV charging. I'll be participating in a focus group that PSC is putting on where they're going to be exploring opportunities for more innovative charging that could be more accessible to folks that live in multifamily or don't have access to a charger at home. They're looking, from what I understand, they're looking to model a program after what Seattle City Light has launched, where they're putting chargers in the street lights and just making them, and utility poles, making it more accessible along the road. So we'll share more as we learn about that program. And then somewhat related to that, we were brainstorming some ideas for a city-sponsored event in the spring around Earth Month. This year, we really deferred to all the partners that were doing Earth Day or Earth Month events, but thinking we might try and do something on our own next year, maybe around electric vehicles, but really open to any ideas if anyone has event ideas or something that we could do with the community around the ICAP, or whether it's EV charge or electric vehicles or charging, or something around the ICAP that we could really focus on and excite the community and motivate them. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not exactly sure how the jurisdiction with like City of Issaquah and the Issaquah School District really works, but I think it could be pretty cool because I know a number of teachers at Skyline. I know that's Sammamish, but I'm sure at other schools as well. There's a number of teachers and plenty of students who have electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So as a potential location for electric vehicle charging stations, and then also tying that together with like a workshop, an educational workshop, so we can link both of them together and kind of like do one.
Cool. Yeah, it's just let me know if you're interested in brainstorming ideas, if you like putting together events, just looking for any ideas on what we might think about doing next year.
Okay, so these events will be next year?
Yeah, I think probably a spring one. We were thinking of something this fall, and then Salmon on Sunset came up, and so I don't want to overwhelm the community, but I think it might be nice to do city-sponsored event next year. Yeah, I'd be happy to join. Good. That's it. Any questions on ICAP implementation?
Seems like it's coming along really well.
Yes, I think it's been a lot of focus on external work this year and the community campaigns. I think next year with additional staff, new facilities manager on board, I think there's a great opportunity to really focus on the internal municipal operations, and that's when I think having some more discussions around policies and what the city's going to require of itself, I think we'll start having those more with the board. So I'm excited to move into that piece too.
And Stacy, is that October kind of bigger update or share out? Is that when you expect to have details on like what the priorities for 23 will be, like the actions or strategies that will be most focused on? Or
that is a good question. I wasn't planning on that as part of that report to council. I could definitely include that. I think that is a conversation I wanted to have with the board. I can't remember if it was, I think November or December. I was planning to have that conversation with the board as we looked at both our schedule as well as what I've outlined as the priorities for 2023. But I'll talk to our city administrator and see if that's something we should include, at least a preliminary list in that.
yeah, and I was more just asking because I didn't see that on here, and I was
Yeah.
curious when that would fit in. I mean, as well as our, yeah, like you said, talking about our work plan, but also, yeah, I would be interested in that process or when there's something to share out there.
Yeah, I slated that kind of for December and then maybe a revisit in January, but could look to bring that earlier.
This is kind of on a different subject, so if there's more discussion around this, so we're gonna see the city's CIP potentially in October. And is each department presenting that in terms of help? And the reason I'm asking this, and I'll go to the end before you answer that question, is it seems to me, we've talked to many departments and suggested it's time for them to do something in their capital program to change the energy use or to think about their carbon footprint. We've suggested to parks moving away from gas leaf blowers, gas, on and on and on. So it will be interesting to see what the capital program looks like and if any of that's kind of being considered. So that's why I'm asking if the departments are presenting it, because personally, I will have some questions if we're not starting to see that in a 5-year capital program or 6 years, however long the city is doing it. If we're not seeing money going towards implementation of ICAP and reducing our carbon emissions, we're not going to meet our deadlines. And so I'm hoping that you're signaling to whoever's presenting this that they should be prepared for these questions, because we have a big deadline in 2030. And if this is a 6-year CIP, it'll be the end of 2028. And if we're not doing anything in that time frame, if it's not in there as a major piece of each department's capital program, then we're not going to meet our goals. That's just my 2 cents. So I'm forewarning whoever's coming.
Great, yeah, thank you. I need to circle with our deputy city administrator, that's who is planning to come. And I believe her intent was to provide an overview of the process and start the conversation with the board about environmental scorecard essentially for the CIP. So she's on my list to circle with this week or next week, and I can send a note out to the board on what we expect for that presentation.
I think we should see projects as well. That's just my 2 cents, because I think we have been signaling to departments they need to do things differently. We're hoping to signal that. And I think that's the message we've got to get back to council at some point if we're not seeing that. And that is that with the capital, this is my guess, the capital program will not allow us likely to meet our ICAP goals. Action commitments. I mean, likely it might, but it takes a whole different kind of thinking to build a capital program to meet the deadline or the goals we set for 2030. And that's just kind of and as someone who managed capital for an agency, would be very hard to do.
And I do think on that same topic, and you mentioned next year, hopefully the city will have more kind of bandwidth to look at internal operations, but I do think, I can't remember what it was, but there were certain things like overhauling the security system is it like we have to go and buy 150 electric leaf blow? Like there's some things that are kind of operating that maybe we need to think about making capital because of the scale of what we need to replace. So I would be really interested, one, there's going to be, sounds like, that scorecard of kind of informing purchasing decisions with this in mind, but also are there just things that we need to be prioritizing as these are we need to make a commitment and this is a large expense that we might need to think about, including that you might just be replacing usually just replacing things as they broke. Are there any things that we can't wait until they break to take them out of service? Would be another area that I do think, it sounds like it'll probably be on what we talk about next year. I'm curious how stuff like that makes it, I think that part of how things get purchased and how these types of decisions get made is something I'm really interested in us diving into next year. So I think the CIP conversation probably won't talk about that, but that's where I think we might need to have that be a part of the CIP conversation. Because otherwise, it's just some of these things that we're doing, or to Nancy's point, goals that we might have are going to be really hard to do, just asking council for some expenditure, where some of these might not be expenditures that they're really able to do. So just think of being planful and thinking about some of those topics would be area worthwhile as we have the CIP as well as the internal focus.
That's all I have.
All right, any other business or reports out from the rest of the board? Rishi?
Yeah, it's not really anything we've talked about, but I just had like a question to the board is, so at Skyline High School, we're really interested in incorporating like green building initiatives. So my question to you is whether you have any idea of like either low-hanging fruit or other actions we can pursue with our school board to make Skyline a green building.
Are you recycling and doing compost and all of that already?
Yeah, so that's one of the issues. We have no collector who comes to grab our compost after the pandemic. So currently it's just garbage and recycling. So that's obviously something we're looking towards, but it's not clear at the moment if that's going to be possible if there's no one there to collect it.
There's a couple ideas. So with compost, you can make your own compost pile, talk to your facilities department, and see if they'd be willing to do something along those lines and use it. Wazoo used to do that, and they had a class all about compost, right? I took it. But they use the compost around the facility in their gardens and whatnot. So that was one way that they dealt with that problem over there, because Pullman doesn't have that collection either. Downspout disconnection of your building. If your building has downspouts going into the ground, then that means they're going into the stormwater system somewhere. You could look to disconnect those and put that water onto the ground rather than have it go into the streams and lakes. There's lots of little things that can be done along those lines. You might even, Rishi, have some success getting a consultant on board pro bono for free to come just walk around the building with you guys, and they could use it as a sales pitch or something along their lines.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of feedback I'm looking for.
I'd also be interested in the same thing we just talked about, like leaf blower, like there's all these, I mean, big building improvements might be tough. Like I actually think some of the lower hanging fruit are like, yeah, are people using gas powered 2-stroke leaf blowers and those types of things? Like what is the grounds crew using? That would be an area. I mean, vehicles are probably tough. Vehicles and heating and like cooling systems would probably be tough. That's where a lot of the department would be, but lights, that's great.
Lights.
Yeah, do you have to check to see if they have all LED lights? And, but there's timers to make sure that the lights are going off if nobody's using it. In the
Toilets,
bathrooms.
your toilets,
Yeah.
low flush toilets, your sinks that you're basically, your faucets, they turn off when your hand's there, and don't know how they're set up in there, but.
I'm sure Skyline's pretty high tech.
It's all the push buttons to get the water start flowing.
Oh,
That's kind
that's
of that, a little
So
bit.
when it runs
yeah.
past though, it
Yeah.
wastes some if you're not having your hand underneath it.
A handful of them are low flow, and then some of them are water.
Yeah, and so that's things that, you can bring to the administration potentially as improvements to the building to be more green.
PSC would be more than happy to come in and talk with you about your lighting.
Yeah, and potentially like when they need to get a new heater, if they ever need to get a new heater, switching to a heat pump. Do you have an air conditioner?
Yeah, I think school life.
Yeah, so they might already have a giant heat pump, but if not, that's something to think about.
Bring Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District, I assume that supervises the water and sewer, and have them do an inventory of the fixture counts and what could be done to improve it. And their conservation program could help fund it for the school district. So through Cascade Water Alliance or something like that. So there's an opportunity there if you bring in the water and sewer district, they could find ways.
Thank you so much.
And maybe like if there's natural light coming in, do you even need to have the lights on? Stuff like that. And then the cleaning products, what kind of cleaning products are they using? There's a lot of really environmentally friendly cleaning products out there. Even just vinegar and water works great.
Did we give you enough
That
ideas?
was plenty. to work with. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Definitely came to the right group with that.
I just have one more, which is less the school, but the students. One thing that, and this is a hard sell, I would just be interested in, I would actually be more interested in your guys' feedback on like the palatability of, every day I live right down by Issaquah High School, the number of like individual cars going to the same place and then the bus behind them, that seems like an opportunity as well, and that doesn't involve, so maybe in some ways it would, the administration, but that seems like if there's any, like, that's a behavior change
Yeah,
opportunity that it also would help everyone get to school faster and
That's definitely a problem.
with less
that's
traffic, so.
actually one of the most important things, is if people could, ride their bicycles.
E-bikes, even if it's an e-bike.
Yeah, ride the bus, walk.
It's a hard
Not
sell to
right.
a high school.
Yeah,
I think-
that's what I said, it's a hard sell.
One of the more convenient ones is that we're working on is just increasing carpools, because it's like free parking on the campus.
Oh.
And that's where it could be interesting time, if there
Yeah,
are
that's more
incentives
fun.
for certain behavior from the school,
Yeah.
that would be, I don't know. Yeah, a carpooling spot would be one,
Oh, yeah, up front.
yeah, something like that, to
Yeah.
incentivize the right behavior from students.
Or
Yeah.
find some security for e-bikes, if you can get the kids to more consider riding an e-bike. If there's a secure place for the bike, because I know bikes get ripped off a lot,
Yeah.
so, maybe creating some kind of locker system for bikes so that that's a big expense. Car is easy to lock up, a bike is not.
Yeah, but just maybe promote how much more fun it is to carpool than go by yourself.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
All right,
All right, anything else from anyone? All right, well, we're adjourned then.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
All right, great meeting, everyone.
So, Jamie?